Well, it's June in the garden, my friends, and as I look above me, barely a speck of blue sky. So June gloom is in full effect here at the Epic Homestead, but we're gonna give you top picks for June no matter where you live, both myself and Jacques here in San Diego, but also Shannie over in Florida. And a lot of these picks will work not only in our warmer climates, but in yours if you're in a zone 5, 6, 7 as well, because it's June. So let's kick it off with my first pick, which is a bit of a bonus. So right here, you see the past and the future of my first pick, which is re-sowing a round of herbs, or if it's your first time for the season, sowing herbs in general. I've got a bunch for you, but to me, this is one of the highest value things you can grow. Anything you grow out there in the vegetable garden that's a large vegetable like a cucumber, squash, tomato, pepper is going to be enhanced by all of this stuff right here in the kitchen. And it's also one of the most expensive things that you'd have to go buy if you were to run out to the store and grab some sage, oregano, rosemary, etc. So let me show you how we start these because they can be a little tricky. So I have basil, thyme, oregano, sage, and rosemary, which would kind of be your classic Mediterranean style herbs in order of difficulty of starting. So basil is gonna be your easiest. You've got Italian Genovese, which of course is the classic. If you want something that doesn't bolt or flower as quickly, it kind of flowers late in the season, it produces a ton of dense leaves, go with Emerald Towers. But basil is probably the easiest one to start from seed. The reason why is because it doesn't take too long to germinate, maybe 5-10 days or so. And then it also has what's called a mucilaginous seed coating, which means when it's exposed to water, it will kind of gel up, and that helps keep that moisture in and helps it germinate. It's just a little bit slow to get started. So when I used to grow these as microgreens, I found that it would take probably about 25 days to get a crop going, but you can start it from seed, no problem. Then you get into your thymes and your oreganos. Those are tiny, tiny seeds. You'd want to surface sow them right over, barely cover them at all, keep them nice and moist because drying out is going to be the reason that those seeds won't start well. And then you got a larger seed like sage, pretty darn easy to grow, will germinate in 1 to 2 weeks. And then the extra credit bonus version, definitely let me know in the comments if you've ever done this, is growing rosemary from seed. Most people don't do this. You definitely can, but to be honest, I like propagating off of rosemary, whether it's mine or a friend's. Really easy to just take a cutting of, put that in water, or stick it into one of our 6 cells like this, and it'll grow roots like crazy. You don't have to worry about the germination time, because this can take up to a month to germinate. But the way you'd start them all is pretty much the same. Scatter sow them in a tray like this, cover them up with a touch of soil, keep them moist, and once they sprout, make sure they do not dry out before you transplant them.
For me, my favorite plant in the garden by far is the humble tomato plant. And now at this point of the year, I'm starting to get ripe fruit. Just the other day, I picked my first big ol' red beefsteak. But it is still time to start some more tomatoes here in June because you could be growing determinate tomatoes. Those are the bushing types. They're the ones that usually grow within 3 months, settle their fruit basically at once, ripening over like a 2-week period, making it very easy to stash your freezer full of tomatoes, your jars full of tomatoes, and basically you'll have tomatoes all the way through the winter time into next spring when you can start your tomato plants again. So what I have are 2 different varieties here. I have the Container's Choice Bush Tomato and also the Italian Roma. Now the great thing about both of these is that they could both be used for sauce or they could be used for fresh eating. But if you don't want to start seeds at this point of the year, I will also show you how to propagate the plants that you might already have growing in your garden. So you don't have to buy any new seeds, any new plants. You can just start what you already have. But first, let's go over a little bit of seed starting basics when it comes to starting your tomatoes. When it comes to starting tomatoes from seed, this is really the best time you could possibly do it for one particular reason, and that is that you don't have to start them inside. It is now hot enough pretty much actually anywhere in the United States, you could start your seeds outside, and tomatoes, they respond really well to warmer weather. So what I'm going to do here is I got my Container Choice. I'm gonna go ahead and just put 1 seed per cell. And when it comes to growing tomatoes at this time of the year, especially for any type of determinate tomato, what I like to do is just get them in the 6 cells. As soon as they're up and they have their 2 or 3 true leaves, that tomato can go in the ground, no problem. You don't have to pot it up. You don't have to plant it deep. It's a determinate tomato, so it's not going to be around for the long haul. You just want to plant it at the soil surface and walk away. But what about all those tomato plants, those beautiful tomato plants that you already have growing in your garden? How can we propagate and clone them for free? Well, it's actually super easy. The beautiful thing about this method is that you're only sacrificing your tomato suckers. That is the extra growth that comes between the main stem and one of the leaf nodes. These are the perfect candidates for actually propagating your tomatoes. All you have to do is get a pair of pruners, or actually you don't even need pruners. You could just grab your hand, take the cutting just like that, snapped off nice and easy. What I like to do though is I like to remove like one of the extra leaf sets like that, If there's a flower cluster on there, I'll also go ahead and pinch that off, just because I want this plant to be focusing on rooting, not doing anything else whatsoever. Now there are two primary ways of doing this. The first one is that you just get a cup of water, drop your tomato in there, and that will produce roots. Once you see roots on the stem, you could take that, transplant it in your garden. My preferred method though, is to get a container like these 4 cells, fill them with soil, take your tomato cutting, and then simply poke it right into the soil, and then just press firmly around it. That way you have good soil contact with the actual cutting itself. So I'm gonna borrow a little soil from this cell here, get it firmed in, nice and tight. When you have that full soil coverage on the stem, it should root really nicely. And I actually have some perfect examples here of ones that I just rooted, I think literally just a week ago. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull one out to sacrifice. At the bottom, you could see that they are rooting, and one of them actually has the stem sticking out with the roots. So I'm gonna give this a nice little smack, see if I could get it loosened. And it's only been in here, like I said, a week, so I don't think the soil is gonna hold, but I just wanted to show you guys what the roots look like. So if I take this away, you can see right there, those are the roots coming out of the stem of the tomato plant. So now if you imagine this is all wrapped up in soil, you're gonna have the roots into the soil itself, which makes it much easier to transplant the tomato rather than something like this that just comes out of a cup of water and then has to go into the soil. So easy propagation for your tomatoes, multiply your plants for free.
June in Florida is absolutely sweltering. It is in the mid-90s now. It's going to keep creeping up. It's going to stay incredibly hot for the next few months. So anything that's going in my garden this month has to be absolutely bulletproof. These hanging baskets have been a real challenge in my garden because of the full sun exposure and the small size of the baskets. They dry out quickly, even with some auto irrigation here. So these sad little nasturtiums have got to go, and I've got to put something much more rugged in their place. So I've settled on growing some portulaca or moss rose. This is a semi-succulent plant. It is native to Argentina. It can take an insane amount of heat, and it can accept quite a bit of drought and poor rocky soil. Now, the soil in these hanging baskets is actually pretty good, which is just gonna make the plants happier and more lush. But I know that if I were to forget and let these dry out, portulaca is going to be just fine. Moss rose is going to be just fine. Moss rose seeds are super duper tiny. Some people will actually mix them with a bit of sand to make distribution of seeds easier, because they are so small it can be hard to keep track of them and it can be hard to space them out. But I am going to very lightly sprinkle these seeds, and then I'm just going to rough up the area ever so gently. If you have something like vermiculite, that's another way to very lightly cover these seeds. You don't want to bury them too deeply. Surface sowing and a light covering is fine. Now, ideally, you want to space these seeds about 3 inches apart, but if you're going to sprinkle them, just make sure to thin them to about 3 inches apart, and they will fill in easily. Each plant is about 12 inches, 8 to 12 inches wide and about 3 inches tall. So it's a low growing mat of a plant. So just a few plants in these hanging baskets is going to nicely fill out the planter, and they're going to become a hanging kind of dripping plant. So I'm very excited to get something a little more rugged and drought tolerant in these hanging baskets.
For my next pick, there's a saying, knee high by the 4th of July. And those of you who know that already know what I'm about to say, but it won't be knee high, this crop, unless you plant it in June or a little bit earlier. And of course, I am talking about the wonderful corn. Easily one of my favorite things to grow. I've had a little bit more space over the last few years here at the homestead, so I've been able to grow a lot more of it. In fact, a couple years back, Jacques and I grew a corn maze over there, and then we ate progressively hotter peppers until we almost threw up, and it was quite an experience. So we've grown quite a bit of corn here. What you need to know about corn is varieties. I think you should probably just grow sweet corn. There's flint corn, there's popcorn, there's all these different types, but if you want fresh eating corn out of the field or the garden, or something that you can toss in the microwave or the oven, then sweet corn is the way to go. If you are in a cold climate, plant your corn ASAP and try butter gold, because it's 63 days to maturity. Unlike some of these other varieties, True Gold, which is one that I have in my garden right here, this one's gonna be 70 to 80 days, and in a cold climate, that extra 20 days makes all the difference sometimes. If you do want a little bit of different color going on, a little white and gold, then you've got these two, Honey and Cream and Ambrosia. So there's a lot of different varieties that you can go with, but planting them is really going to be all the same. Now, what you need to know is that corn is a wind pollinated plant. There's these tassels, which would be the male part on the top. Once it starts to grow, there's these silks that are sort of at the end of what will future be the cob. And the pollen needs to drop from the tassels onto the silks, ideally by getting jostled by the wind. So corn is planted in blocks. Usually like a 4x4 block is really nice. Space them about 9 to 12 inches apart, and then they'll kind of all jostle together. But you can plant them in a row. You just want to avoid planting them in a straight row. So what I would do is I would take my corn kernels like this, and at least in this case, since I have irrigation, I can use that as my measuring stick. But I would come here. This is going to be my first one. I'd skip over this one and I'd go here, and then I'd come here. So I'd probably plant them about 9 to 12 inches apart in a line, and I'd offset right in the center. So I get this kind of zigzag pattern. And I'd come in like that, that, and that. Of course, I might plant more than one. And then I'd cover, cover, cover. So you'd go down in this zigzag-like pattern. You'd have a nice little blocked row of corn. You could plant it even a little bit more densely if you wanted to. That's gonna be probably your biggest reason you will fail with corn, but of course we have some other videos on corn that will help you out.
At this point in the year, my garden is really starting to fill up with plants, and I'm running out of space to plant a lot of new things. But there is a plant that I really like to wait for June because it gets nice and hot to get started in the garden, and there's a way to actually make use of it so it doesn't take up too much space, and that is, of course, the humble cucumber. So the reason I like to wait until June to start my cucumbers is because they're a plant that really does not handle transplanting well, and they really only grow once the soil is warm, not just the outside air temperature, but you want your soil to be nice and warm. A way to get a little bit faster if you're in a cold climate is to make sure you're doing it in a raised bed, because those soils will heat up a little bit faster. And in terms of saving space, because I know that in June, the garden really starts to fill out for a lot of people, using an A-frame trellis like this, draped over 2 separate raised beds, means that I could plant all my cucumbers in one skinny little section here, let them climb over without wasting any space on this side where my peppers are now growing. So the way we're going to do this is I'm going to come in, I'm going to be starting 3 different rows of cucumbers here, and I'll probably thin it down to 2. Now in terms of varieties, this year I am going with something a little bit new for me, and one that I'm very excited for, and that is the Hocus gherkin. Now, if you don't know, a gherkin is just like those tiny pickles, also called like petit cornichons. They're basically just a super crunchy, tiny pickle. So I really want to try doing that this year. But for a classic cucumber that's kind of all-purpose, the muncher is one of my favorites. It's great on salads. It's not bitter. You can eat the skin. You don't have to peel it. So that's a great one. And if you live somewhere crazy hot, like Tucson or Texas, anywhere that gets into the hundreds, the Armenian cucumber is pretty much your only choice. I know people in Tucson who grow these in the summertime, and they could still harvest delicious cucumbers. It is technically a melon, but for all intents and purposes, it's a cucumber. So today we're going to be starting these Hocus gherkins directly in the ground. And the way I like to do this is I always start more than one seed, especially if I'm direct seeding, because anytime you start one, the chances of that failing or getting eaten by a pest is too high for me. I don't want to suffer any of those losses where everything is gone. So instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to come out here about a foot in from the edge of the trellis. I'm going to tuck in 2 seeds, 1, 2, get those nice and planted, tucked in nice and tight. Then I'm going to go down to the other end of the trellis until I'm again at the same spot on the other side, and go ahead and put 2 seeds there as well. So this way, once they actually come up, I will thin them down to just be ultimately 1 cucumber plant. Now I'll have 1 cucumber here, 1 cucumber here. They'll be able to grow up and over the trellis. It'll be super easy to pick all those tiny cucumbers from the middle. So cucumbers, doesn't matter if it's June, you could definitely still get them started because they love the warm soil that June provides.
It's way too hot and sunny over in the raised bed garden, so I decided for my next selection, I would bring you into the food forest under the shade of my banana and my mulberry tree. I want to show you one of my favorite tropical leafy greens. This is sisu. Here I have some rooted cuttings. These were super easy to root in a sunny window in my kitchen in a glass of water. And now I'm going to plant them out at the base of a banana tree here in my food forest. And you can see this is a super low growing plant. I'm way down here on the ground to show you. This is an established sisu plant. So it is the lowest in the canopy of the food forest. This is your ground cover plant, the very lowest layer. And they do prefer part shade. I have grown these plants in full sun. They will grow in full sun in Florida throughout the summer, no problem. But they'll be more lush and more tender and delicious if you give them part shade to shade. Now, I've never grown sisu from seed. I don't believe it's easy to find seeds. It's much easier to grow cuttings, rooted cuttings. I can't say enough good things about sisu. You've got to give this plant a try, whether you're in a food forest, a grow tower, or your raised bed garden. Absolutely give it a shot.
I love flowers, and I love flowers in the garden. I think a lot of people out there are still disrespecting the flowers. They think that it's just a pretty face, but this thing is doing a lot of work in our gardens. It's not just making us happy and feel good when we see those beautiful colors, that's attracting beneficial pollinators, beneficial insects, and all sorts of good life to your garden. Now, it is June, so it's not a right time to start a ranunculus. We'll set that guy aside and give it to the tomatoes over here. But it is the perfect time to start summer classics like the Cosmo and also the Zinnia. These are both flowers that are actually oftentimes started a little bit too early. These are flowers that benefit from warmer soil, and there's really no reason to start them earlier than you have to. So June, the soil's warmed up, and it's a great time to get them going. Let me give you a couple tips on how to get these started and how to get the most success with them. As I mentioned earlier, my garden is quite full right now. So as much as I love these Cosmos, this is one of the Sensation Blend Cosmos. These can get 3 to 6 feet tall, and right now it's definitely already in that 3-foot range. So instead, let's go ahead and start some zinnias in ground. The cool thing about flowers is that there aren't just a variety of colors, but there's also a variety of sizes. So although I love the Queenie Lime Orange Zinnia, it's definitely one of my favorites. One of the most beautiful, interesting flowers in the garden. This one can get pretty tall, close to 3 feet. And the space that I have to work with right now is this little pocket right here between my broccoli plants. So what we're going to do instead is opt for the Thumbelina Zinnia. This little guy is so interesting because it only gets 10 to 16 inches tall, and this is a perfect zinnia for small, tight garden spaces or even a container. Now, when it comes to actually starting the seeds, it's actually really quite simple. One of the most simple seeds out there. Just go ahead and grab your seeds, clear off a little bit of that surface mulch. I'm gonna go ahead and drop in 2 to 3 seeds here, just like that. Cover them up very lightly, and then once that gets watered, we should be good to go. The beautiful thing about this whole system is that these tiny flowers are really only gonna get about this tall here, something like this. They're still going to attract butterflies, they're not gonna take up too much space, and they're not going to compete for that many resources. So now you have no excuses to not start some flowers in your garden.
So this one I'm really excited about because I'm turning over my potato patch, which looks kind of bad right now, but it's bad on purpose. These are dying back. They're gonna have absolutely monster harvests. I'll throw a picture up for you. We had probably 150 pounds of potatoes out of just half of this bed. But in its place, I'm putting in maybe the quintessential summer fruit, and that would be watermelon. So with watermelon, there's a couple things to know. I have 4 varieties for you. I've grown all 4. I like all 4, but I do have a couple favorites. So if you need something that's going to grow really quickly, then I would go with this one right here. This is Sugar Baby. It's an 80-day to maturity. So if you are in a colder zone, that might be your choice. If you want a little color, a little bit of different action going on, then go with this one, Mountain Sweet Yellow. I personally don't like that color as much. I like a more classic looking watermelon. Then of course you've got Crimson Sweet, which is maybe your most classic looking watermelon. Then my personal favorite, which I've grown 2 years in a row now, the Charleston Gray. This is a honker, guys. This thing grows so big, it's hard to believe. It's like 30 pounds, 40 pounds sometimes. I had one, maybe I have a picture. It's like just absolutely massive, and it's so, so delicious. But to get it delicious, you need to understand how to actually plant the watermelon. So I've got a couple right here. There's a small one here. There's one right below my knee right here. Watermelon is a mound planted crop. So if you were gonna plant, let's say the Charleston Gray, what you would do is you'd pop the seed pack open, you would grab out about 2 or 3 seeds, and you'd plant them in a mound. So if I was gonna plant it right here, well, I got some potatoes there, and actually, let me just show off for you real quick. They're just coming out of the ground like crazy. I mean, look at this. I could dig out a bunch right here. Look at that, solid potato. But let's go ahead and say I was gonna plant it right here. What I would do is I'd kind of create a little mound like this, right? And what I do is just kind of punch that down just a touch. I'd throw about 3 seeds in like this, just like that. I might cover a little compost, I might throw a little mulch on top, but I basically just cover it like that, put a label in right here. When these 3 came up, I would come over like this and I'd thin it out to the best looking plant. and I'd plant mounds every 4 to 6 feet in a diamond pattern, kind of like I showed you with that corn over there. So I might go here, 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 and there. And what that would do is I'd be singling out the best plant per mound, and then they would all be helping each other fruit a little bit better. And then watermelon, of course, needs good amount of nitrogen, absolute ton of water. There's some clever tricks that you can use to boost your harvest even further. If you want to see those tricks, I would check this video out right here. But June, guys, is the time to plant. And if you want to mess around with some of these varieties, our new Epic Seed line is at shop.epicgardening.com, curated list of 40 varieties proven to work. And if you want to experiment with a vast array of different varieties, check our seed company out, botanicalextras.com. I'll see you guys soon. I got to harvest some potatoes. Good luck in the garden and keep on growing.